Welcome back to Most Amazing Top 10. My name is Danny Burke, and here on this channel we often talk about pretty scary things, but they're usually fictional, they're made up, they're not real. But you know what is terrifying? Scary things that really did happen. They say the truth hurts, but I think it can also scare you silly. So let's get into our top 10 scary stories that are real. Coming in number 10, we have the woman in the cupboard, and this one is really strange, really odd. In 2000, a man in Japan became suspicious when food started disappearing from his apartment. So the man decided to set up cameras all around the place in the hope of catching whoever was doing this. When he got home the next day, he looked at the camera footage and he was very creeped out to see a woman walking around his house. He thought she was a burglar and she'd just come to steal some stuff when he was out, and so he rang the police. But when officers searched the place, they found a 58-year-old woman hiding in the top of a cupboard designed to store bedding and mattresses. What? This was just enough room for her to lie down, and she had been living in the cupboard the whole time, lying there perfectly still in the dark, just meters away from him, waiting for him to leave so she could use the house as if it were her own. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I think I'm going to do a quick check of every single cupboard in my house when I get home, and by quick I mean 10 hours. Next up at number 9 now, we have Armin Meiwes. This story is not really for those with a delicate stomach, so look away if that's you. In the early 2000s, Armin visited a little known website called the Cannibal Cafe. He posted a list looking for a well-built 18 to 25-year-old to be slaughtered and then consumed. His words, not mine. Yeah, normally young adults want good jobs, they want to travel, maybe find a partner and be slaughtered and then consumed, apparently. Amazingly, a few people actually replied and then backed out, presumably when they realized it was insane. But one man, Bernard Brandes, actually went to Armin's house. They then made a video of Armin cutting off his penis. He then tried to cook it and eat it, but it got burnt apparently, so he fed it to his dog. This happened. As Brandes bled to death in the bathtub, Armin gave him alcohol and 20 sleeping pills and then read a Star Trek book for 3 hours. He then kissed him and then killed him and then froze the flesh for 10 months while he lived off it and ground the bones into flour. Amazingly, he was only caught when he posted online the following year looking for his next meal and victim, and bragged about what had happened before. He is now serving life in prison. Moving on to number 8 now, we have the Silent Twins. Jennifer and June, the Gibbons twins from the UK, were known as the Silent Twins because they only ever talked to each other. Their sisterly love, and then there was this. The girls were absolutely obsessed with each other and gradually began to shun the community around them, who were not very welcoming to the girls. Eventually, they developed their own language and started communicating and committing crimes together, such as arson. This led them to be committed to a mental health institution for 14 years. June later said the whole thing went too far, and although we longed to be normal, we couldn't break out. It was too late, we were twins, but our personalities clashed. She wrote in her diary that her sister was a dark shadow, robbing her of sunlight. Now, psychologists deemed them deeply disturbed, and the girls felt so trapped, they said the only way that one of them could lead a normal life was if the other one died and freed them. The day after they were released from the institution, Jennifer died from a rare heart inflammation. June began to speak to others and went on to live a normal life for the first time. She wrote the epitaph on her sister's gravestone that read, "We once were two, we two made one. We no more two, through life be one. Rest in peace." Creepy. Coming in at number 7, I'm Watching You. In 2015, a woman called Chelsea Clark from Toronto was watching movies in bed with her boyfriend. The next day, after work, she logged into her Facebook account and saw that she had a message from someone she didn't know. Now, Chelsea thought this was quite strange because her settings didn't allow messages from strangers. The message was titled, "Really Cute Couple." Chelsea opened it to find a guy with his profile picture as the Joker had sent pictures of her and her boyfriend in bed the night before to her. The account was deleted soon after, and police investigations have made no leads at the moment. So, Next time you're watching something on your laptop, guys, maybe your tablet or your phone at night, someone could be watching right back at you. In at number 6 now, we have Joseph Metheny. Before our story even begins, Joseph had already killed 10 people in a number of different grisly ways. The victims were usually crack cocaine addicts or prostitutes that he would hack to death with an axe under a bridge. One witness, who was just fishing nearby, got beaten to death with a steel pipe simply for just seeing a murder take place. Joseph was still not caught, and so he opened his own burger stand. Like you do. Now, whenever he killed a new prostitute, he would use the meat in his burgers that he would sell to people. When he was eventually caught and arrested, Metheny told police, "I would also sell real roast beef and pork sandwiches. They were very good. The human body taste was very similar to pork. If you mix it together, no one can tell the difference." Next up at number 5 now, we have the cell phone stalker. In 2007, a family in Washington state started getting unwelcome calls on their phones. Throughout the night, the calls threatened to kill their children, the grandparents and the pets, and creepily, they would also get voicemails of their own private conversations, and even one where they were talking to a police detective about this whole thing. Disturbingly, when the phone call's origins were traced, they seemed to come from the family's own phones, even when they were switched off. Their phone company said this should not be possible. At one point, even the neighbor got a call. She was apparently slicing limes in her kitchen when the stalker called and said he preferred lemons. No matter how many times they changed their phones, the calls just kept coming. The stalker was never caught, and in the end, the family said if they go a day without a call, that's a good day. Okay, moving on to the number 4 spot now, we have the girl in the box. In 1977, 20-year-old Colleen Stan was kidnapped while hitchhiking from her home in Oregon. Her captors, Cameron and Janice Hooker, took her to the Californian hills and kept her in a sort of coffin-like box. Colleen would often spend 23 hours in this box at a time, only being allowed out to be beaten, raped and tortured. This went on for 7 years, from 1977 until 1984. At that point, Janice Hooker, one of the captors, finally went to the police and told them everything. Colleen was rescued, reunited with her family, and underwent a lot of therapy to try and live a normal life again. I'm amazed that anyone could do that after spending 7 years locked in a coffin for sometimes 23 hours a day. Next up at number 3, we have the Hinterkaifeck murder. In 1922, an entire family living at the Hinterkaifeck farm in Germany were killed by wounds from a pickaxe. The parents, widowed daughter, her children, and even the housekeeper were all found dead. 4 of them were in the barn and 2 of them were in their beds. Here's the really creepy thing. The murderer apparently continued to live at the farm with the family's dead bodies there for some time afterwards. Police knew this because when they arrived, the animals were still being fed. Neighbors apparently saw smoke coming from the chimney, and also the dog was tied up outside the barn. It gets even creepier. Before their murders, the family had reported hearing footsteps in the attic, seeing footprints in the snow that led from the woods to the house but not back the other way, and they also saw claw marks on the door of the tool shed where they kept the pickaxe that was used to kill them. The crime was never solved. Coming in at number 2 now, we have The Waking Dead. This story comes from Honduras, where a girl called Nacy Perez went into a panic attack after hearing gunshots. When she started foaming at the mouth, a priest was called to exorcise her of an evil spirit. Soon though, she was pronounced dead in hospital and buried in her wedding dress at the cemetery. A day after the funeral, her husband was visiting her grave when he heard banging and screaming coming from inside the concrete tomb. A graveyard worker confirmed hearing the exact same thing. The family arrived, smashed open the tomb and took her to hospital. Her cousin said she put her hand on her body and she was still warm. She had scratches on her forehead and bruises on her fingers. It looked like she had tried desperately to get out of the casket and had hurt herself. She was pronounced dead again at the hospital and buried for a second time. Some people say she didn't actually die the first time and instead might have woken up inside the coffin and died from lack of oxygen. And finally now, at number 1, we have Rodney Alcala. This man is a convicted rapist and serial killer who has been sentenced to death for the murder of 5 women between 1978 and 1979. The scary thing is, it's thought he could have killed as many as 50. Right in the middle of this killing spree, Rodney Alcala was accepted as a contestant on the dating game TV show where men compete for a date with a bachelorette. In the TV footage, it's incredibly disturbing to see this man flirting with women as he had just killed 2 women recently.
I'm called the banana and I look really good.
Not long after, Rodney Alcala would go on to kill 2 more women. Horrifyingly, he actually beat the other contestants. The only sliver of light in this dark story is the fact that the woman that he won the date with eventually refused to go on the date with him because she found him creepy. I hope someone studied her superhuman senses because that woman was on the ball. Starting off at number 10, we have the killer body fumes. In 1994, Gloria Ramirez was rushed to hospital with breathing problems and ended up dying from heart and kidney failure. While they were trying to save her, the ER staff inserted an IV drip into her and drew some blood. They said it smelt like ammonia, and some people reported her skin being covered in a strange oily layer. The nurse then noticed strange particles floating in the blood. Soon, she fainted. Then the doctor left the room, sat down, and also fainted. Next, a respiratory therapist in the room fainted. People started dropping like flies. When they woke up, they couldn't stop shaking and their skin felt like it was on fire. The ones who were closest to Gloria Ramirez ended up being hospitalized for days, but out of the 37 emergency room staff members, 23 of them experienced some of these strange symptoms. Scientists have struggled to put forward a theory as to why Gloria Ramirez's body was just so toxic and how fumes from her blood were just so dangerous. Coming at number 9 now, we have The Watcher. In 2014, a family in Westfield, New Jersey were forced to flee their brand new $1.3 million home after receiving letters from someone who called themselves The Watcher. Now, The Watcher had told the new family that the home had been in his family for decades and that they were put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. Now, if that doesn't sound creepy enough, wait till you hear this. The Watcher then asked if the family's children had found what's in the walls yet, and also said, "I am pleased to know your names now and the names of the young blood you have brought to me." Quite rightly, the family left soon after that, and the police never found out who the Watcher really was. No new letters have been sent, and it's thought the Watcher is just waiting to watch the new arrivals. Next up at number 8 now, we have Heaven's Gate. In 1974, a group called Heaven's Gate formed in the United States. They believed the Earth was about to be recycled. All life would apparently be wiped out, and the only way for them to be saved was to evacuate the planet and get onto a spacecraft that was travelling behind an approaching comet. How? By committing mass suicide. This UFO would then apparently take their souls to a level of existence above human. On March 26, 1997, their bodies were found at a rented California ranch. 38 members had killed themselves by taking a lethal cocktail. Police found all of them lying neatly in their own bunk beds. Their faces were covered with a square purple cloth. All of them had black sweatpants and joggers on, brand new Nike shoes and armband patches that said Heaven's Gate Away Team. This was not a joke. Tapes that they had recorded before the mass suicide can be found on YouTube right now. Coming in at number 7, we have Facebook from Beyond the Grave. In 2014, Reddit user Nate SW shared a very chilling story. On the 7th of August 2012, his girlfriend Emily was killed in a car crash. They had been dating for 5 years. 13 months passed with Nate trying to move on from that, and then on September 4th, 2013, he got a Facebook message from her. At first, Nathan presumed it was from Emily's mother, who he had given the Facebook password to. A few more months passed, and then the messages continued again, making references to some of their past conversations. Then he started getting notifications from her where she would tag herself in his pictures in empty spaces where she should have been. No matter how many times he changed the password, the messages just kept coming. Eventually, she started to say she was cold, really deadly cold. She was freezing and didn't know what was happening to her. To this day, Nathan still doesn't know if this was some sort of sick joke or a chilling message from beyond the grave. Next up at number 6, the cemetery clown. In 2015, Julie Graham and her husband were driving past Rose Hill Cemetery at night when they spotted a figure climbing over the cemetery gate. They captured this picture, but it wasn't until they looped back around that they realized it was a clown. They tried to get a bit closer for a better look, and that's when they saw him standing alone in the middle of the gravestones, slowly waving at them. And yes, that is the creepiest looking wave of all time. He didn't seem scared or bothered by them at all, but before the couple could even understand what was going on, the clown slowly turned around and walked into the darkness of the cemetery. Now, when police investigated all of this the next day, they found no signs of vandalism or disturbance in the graveyard, leading many people to wonder what the cemetery clown was doing that night and if he's going to be seen again. Coming in at number 5 now, we have the children. In the 90s, respected journalist Brian Bethel shared a story that changed his and many others' opinions on the paranormal. One evening, Brian said he was parked outside of a local movie theater and filling out a check for someone. Then he looked up to see 2 boys standing next to the car in the darkness, no more than 10 or 12 years old. Now, before they even spoke, Brian said he was gripped with fear. He couldn't explain why, and that it was just incomprehensible and soul-racking. Only one of the boys spoke, and they said they wanted to see a movie, but they had left their money at home and asked if Brian could give them a ride back to get their money. Now, Brian avoided looking at them because of the fear and instead looked up to see that the last show had already started and there was no way they'd make it back in time. The boy said it wouldn't take long. He said they were just 2 little kids. He said they didn't have a gun or anything. Now, that last sentence scared Brian the most, and as the feeling of terror consumed him, he realized his hand was already moving to unlock the door. That's when he looked up to see their eyes. They were deep, cold black. Brian quickly made his excuses, but as he tried to drive away, the kid started banging on the window and said,
"We can't come in unless you tell us it's okay. Let us in."
Okay, at number 4, we have Robert the doll. Now, this doll was given to a boy, Eugene Otto, in 1904 by a Jamaican woman who worked with the family, who was supposedly a practicer of black magic and voodoo. She had supposedly cursed the doll because she was unhappy with how the family had treated her, and they soon reported hearing conversations between Eugene and Robert the doll. At night, his parents would hear Eugene scream, and when they ran into the bedroom, they would find the furniture around Robert had been thrown around. When the family left to go on trips, the neighbors reported seeing Robert move from window to window of the house, and they would sometimes hear the doll let out a terrifying cackle. Over time, the house was sold on to a new family, but the doll remained there. The new owner, a 10-year-old girl, also screamed in the night and claimed that Robert would move, and that one time he even tried to attack her. These days, he sits in the Fort East Martello Museum in Florida and was the inspiration for the horror movie Child's Play. Moving on to number 3 now, we have Murder Castle. In 1886, pharmacist H.H. Holmes bought a number of properties in Chicago that left him owning an entire city block. He began renovating them into a hotel. He would hire some workers for one part and others for a different area, so nobody really knew the full extent of the hotel's layout. It was finished just in time for the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, where people from all over the world descended on the city. But this wasn't a normal hotel. Almost every part of it was some sort of torture chamber. For most of that year, he trapped unsuspecting guests in their rooms to kill them. There were gas chambers and also rooms to suffocate people or starve them to death, as well as a hanging room. I'm not even sure what a hanging room means, but sounds pretty nasty. The whole building was designed to confuse the victims and give them a false sense of hope. There were staircases that led to absolutely nowhere and doors that were totally bricked off. Once they were dead, Holmes disposed of the bodies through a specially designed chute to dump them into the basement and then incinerate them in huge furnaces. He is known as America's first serial killer. Moving on to number 2, we have the real Leatherface. This is the story story that inspired the movies Psycho, Silence of the Lambs. So, what real life story could produce such horror? It's the story of Ed Gein. This man had a disturbed obsession with his own mother, who had raised him during the earlier 20th century, with strict religious teachings about the sins of lust and desire. Now, after she died in 1945, Ed began to spiral into the life of a serial killer. At first, he would dig up bodies of recently buried females and cut off their body parts to keep as trophies before placing them back in the graves. Then he stepped it up and began a killing spree before police finally caught him. When they discovered the dismembered body of a woman in his farmhouse shed, investigators were also horrified by what else they found. A freshly cooked human heart was on the stove, ready to be eaten. He'd made drinking bowls out of their skulls, and the creepiest thing, I think, was what he had done with his victim's skin. He used them to make furniture, face masks, and women's clothes out of women's skin. I know the horror movie classics were inspired by this, but yeah, they can't really touch on how creepy this really was. And finally, at number 1, we have the death of Elisa Lam. Elisa was a 21-year-old Canadian woman who was visiting LA in 2013. She stayed at the Cecil Hotel in downtown LA and had been calling her parents every single day on her visit. But then on January 31st, the calls suddenly stopped and her worried parents reported her missing to the police. She seemed to have just vanished out of nowhere. Then on February 14th, the police released this video of her behaving very erratically in the hotel elevator. She seemed to exit and then re-enter, and then started making some sort of gesture to something in the hallway outside. At one point, she simply crouches as if to hide from whatever is out there. Eventually, guests of the hotel started complaining about the water, saying it was black, foul tasting, and had low pressure. Now, when staff went to investigate the water tank on the roof of the hotel, they found Elisa Lam's decomposing body. That's why the water was black. Oh god. The police don't know how she got onto the roof, which was locked and alarmed, or how she got into the tank and then replaced the lid from the inside, or what was going on in that elevator. Something really creepy. Some people think that this all points to a murder, others say it was supernatural in nature, that Elisa was actually possessed. Millions of people have now watched the infamous elevator video, and many people say something about it is very, very disturbing. Will it ever be solved?